Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
Ymedia Newsroom, I'm Ramona Singh. It's always a pleasure to be here with you today. On what's taking place with this war that's been going on since February 28th when it comes to the war between the United States and Iran. Well, we're hearing the latest news that President Trump and his administration are expecting to hear a response back from Tehran today in terms of the 14 points that they proposed to Iran for this peace plan. And essentially, Iran has not formally accepted the latest U.S. ceasefire and peace proposal. We had Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, say that it should be hours that we'll hear something about it today. So, of course, this is a moving story. We're going to keep you up to date as soon as things change. But essentially, we know that the ceasefire started on the night of April 7th. It was decided, essentially going into effect since April 8th. And since then, we know that things moved over to the sea with double blockades of the Strait of Hormuz and many reports coming out of that seaway about, vessels being attacked and so on and forth. And today is no different. So we're seeing something happen at the same time, whereas diplomacy talks are to be carrying on, but then there's escalations when it comes to the sea. And of course, this week started with the United Arab Emirates saying that they've been attacked and they had to intervene some of the attacks from Iran. So, and then we've heard reports from Iranians, state media saying that they believe that the United States is gathering to increase their military actions on Iran in these past, little while for the ceasefire. Now it's been about a month. We've hit that 30-day mark. So this is why they said they tried to intercept some of those plans that they believe that GCC countries, when it comes to the U.S. Military bases in those countries, they're increasing their presence throughout this 30-day ceasefire. So it's a very fragile situation, but it does appear that both sides do want to come to the table and come to some sort of an agreement and end this war. It has not been so great for the United States when it comes to gas prices, affordability. It is an election year. Midterms are in October. And of course, it hasn't been so great for Iran, having had damage to its infrastructure. We're talking about trillions of dollars. Of course, what's taken place in terms of the assassination of the Ayatollah and the high-ranking regime, the Iranian regime members, and all of the massive changes taking place. And of course, the blockade on the Iranian ports that's been going on for about 3 weeks now. It's not so great for their export of enrichment of uranium stopped, no nuclear program for 20 years. And Iran's coming back to say, hey, we could agree to this, but we have some of our terms. So center for this negotiations are, of course, the nuclear program, the sanctions. Formalized, agreement where they would control that seaway. And essentially what that means is they would control if, they don't have the ability to do that. And they have to bypass what Iran is saying that they should be in control of, then of course it's going to create a lot of issues between those countries. And we know that in these, recent few months, in terms of the escalations between those countries, and of course last year in the 12-day war with U.S., Israel, and Iran. So we know that these are fragile relationships in place, and they all share this tiny little seaway. the Gulf is essentially what they share. Now, the ceasefire is technically in place, and this is something that the president does say, as well as from Iran's side. But of course, we have to report on what's happening, at the ports, at the Strait of Hormuz. And so it's been in place since April 8th, and the clashes have escalated, and today is no different. We're going to bring you the latest on that. But when it comes to this proposal, before we do that we're supposed to hear very soon from Iran, essentially, the request from the American side is that Iran would halt its uranium enrichment, and Iran has come back saying not 20 years, but they can agree for 12 years. They first started at 3 to 5 years. Now it's gone to 12 years. Commit to not develop any nuclear weapons. Of course, open up the Strait of Hormuz shipping lanes, because Iran has essentially choked that shipping way, and this has become the point of contention for this president. And enter these negotiations, with a 30-day window about all the other escalating matters. And in exchange, if Iran agrees to that, well, of course, the United States would ease its sanctions. There's been sanctions on Iran for a better of 50 years. Essentially release frozen Iranian assets. We're talking about billions of dollars worth, and potentially end naval blockade measures on the Iranian ports. So Iranian officials essentially are saying that they do feel like there should be a pushback, because some of their main objectives are that they demand this, peace proposal to be more one-sided towards the American side. And if you recall previously, when Iran proposed their peace plan, the Americans thought it was too one-sided in favor of Iran. So this is what we're, seeing from both sides. And of course, there is the concern of the uncertainty over, sanctions guaranteed, the relief. And of course, the major point is about the uranium stockpiles that Iran has, what to do with those existing ones, right? And what is what's the agreement there? And then the major elephant in the room would be the distrust that Iran says they have for the United States, that, when this peace proposal goes into place, that it will not attack Iran again. And so this is, these are points of contention, as obviously there's a trust deficit, right, from the experience of what's happened this year and last year. And now, despite this diplomacy, we're seeing the escalations take place in the Strait of Hormuz. Essentially, Iran and the United States have exchanged fire near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has reportedly seized an oil tanker. The United States has struck Iranian-linked vessels, and Iran is accusing Washington of violating the ceasefire. So this is all happening at the same time. Oil prices have remained volatile, right, near the $100 per barrel range. During this disruption, of course, it's done its, massive peaks to like 120 at a time. But why this matters right now is that this conflict went from, 3 countries, Israel, United States, and Iran. And of course, it's created a more first regional conflict with the GCC countries, but more of a global impact when it comes to the oil prices, right? Because we're seeing the outcomes of the global energy markets. We're seeing what the impact is on when it comes to the US elections and politics that are taking place. Of course, the Gulf countries' security in terms of, having those US military bases there as a security assurance from Iran. And we know that during the 39 days of war, they were being attacked. And of course, China is a massive factor in all of this in terms of their energy interests. China is the biggest consumer of Iranian oil, about 40%. And so there's that aspect. Next week, President Trump will be in China. So this is, I could see why he is eager to come to some sort of a peace proposal plan agreement with Iran this week, as opposed to having this looming over his head when he is in China next week. And of course, there's the NATO economies, right, that have been, and the European Union has been heavily impacted because of this war that's taking place, because of their energy security and the global shipping routes, right, that are being impacted. So for Iran, it's essentially accepting the deal and risking appearing weak domestically, right, after essentially standing up to President Trump and the administration. And if it rejects it, it risks renewed bombing and deeper isolation. within the world. So it's one of those situations where we know in this past 30 days since the ceasefire began that the Americans have amplified their presence in the region in case there would be a breakout of war again. So Iran is very well aware of that. And for President Trump, if you were to look at, what he's facing, if he secures a deal, it could become a major foreign policy victory for him. There's a lot that he can claim that, he took out, the Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei. He heavily, fractured the regime. Of course, with the blockade of the Iranian ports, he forced them to come to the table, agree on, 12 years. I think it's going to be of no enrichment of uranium. So some of those, things that he could say that, it's a big victory. Now, a failure to do a deal could trigger renewed escalations for the United States when it comes to many things, when it comes to affordability, gas prices, job numbers, and all of that for the United States. And these are things that this president had campaigned on that he was going to be able to fix from what he would say Sleepy Joe's term, in the White House. So these are massive concerns for the president as well. So both sides really do need an agreement, but also it's how they're going to play out each other's victory in terms of once an agreement is met. So now the U.S. military, it was announced today that it says that it has struck 2 empty Iranian flagged oil tankers and it disabled a third vessel, allegedly attempting to breach what they say would be the American naval blockade near the Gulf of Oman. And according to CENTCOM, from which is there in the region on the American side, American military, they said that the vessels were heading towards Iranian-controlled ports, and the 3 ships have now been stopped, and none of them are continuing towards Iran. So a massive interception that took place, and this is breaking news as we're seeing, what the hopes are for a peace plan. So, definitely it's very interesting that, we're seeing this type of new way of ceasefire where there's pressure, there is definitely attacks on both sides, yet, there is the hopes for diplomacy. Now, the strikes are, they're representing what is this, dangerous escalation, but it seems like it will not, because Iran hasn't escalated to the way that they threatened they would because of the U.S. blockade. So it's probably showing more room to be able to come to the table. But of course, the rhetoric we hear from both sides, from Iran as well as the United States, sometimes say otherwise, right? So the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi essentially responded sharply on X, accusing the United States of sabotaging diplomacy and using military pressures during these active negotiations. Negotiations have been mediated by Pakistan and some of those Gulf countries. So that's still taking place. So Foreign Affairs Minister Araghchi essentially said that he announced that, and these are his terms, saying that Iranians never bow to pressure. We saw that when President Trump tried to have the second round of talks with the Iranian counterparts, and Iran said, no, there's no such measure, remove the blockade first, then we'll come to the table. So, that was a few weeks ago, after the first round of negotiations that Vice President J.D. Vance had led. Now, he's also suggesting this is the Foreign Affairs Minister who's been very active in this entire thing. I mean, he's the one who's taken trips to Pakistan and, to China and, some of the Gulf countries to be able to, restart the conversations, and to Russia. So he's been a very active player in all of this, the Foreign Affairs Minister. We know that the new Ayatollah Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late Ayatollah Khamenei, hasn't been seen, and of course there's concerns of what happened to him when the attacks took place on February 28th, but also what it means for his life being in danger if he is to be seen. So really, you have the Foreign Affairs Minister, as a very active person and a face to these negotiations. And so today was no other that he said He suggested that the attacks were deliberate and as a U.S. coercion, and saying that it's a spoiler, from the United States part under President Trump, and really an escalation. So the key developments are that CENTCOM did say that tankers were empty, and that the actions were framed as what would be an enforcement of the U.S. maritime blockade is a response from the American side, and Iran has claimed that the strikes undermine diplomacy. Tehran says that negotiations are still active, so we'll see what that means for this coming, next few hours. Of course, this is a developing story, so please stay with us on all of it. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.